Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome back to the DMZ, everybody.
So when we last spoke, it was about 60 seconds before Donald Trump and the White House released the call transcript or the summary of a call transcript, whatever you want to define it as.
Seems like weeks ago.
It was literally 1 week ago.
Okay.
And obviously, a lot has transpired since then.
Yes. And it makes you wonder what's happening now that we don't know about.
Right. But even just before then, you were still you were basically pro-impeachment before the transcript. You were already convinced that he had crossed the line.
Because he said he had. He told us what he did. And, you know, he and Rudy both said what they did. And I'll be honest with you, nothing, in my opinion, has changed since then. I mean, a lot of things have developed, but fundamentally, this is a story that we knew before the transcript came out because Trump told us.
Now, I wrote a piece in Real Clear Politics over the weekend. It came out on Monday. And as you know, I was an impeachment skeptic before, and I'm still I'm not sold on the politics of it. I think there still is a risk of political backlash depending on how it is presented. And you know, I just heard on CNN, I forget which congressperson was being interviewed, but the Democrat was being pressed by the CNN interviewer. You know, Maxine Waters said, you know, impeachment's not enough. She needs to be in prison, put in solitary confinement. Is that the level of seriousness do you think this discussion deserves? And he was trying to say that we should be doing it seriously without directly addressing the Maxine Waters comment. So there's this question whether you know, can the rank and file Democrats keep it together and present the right face? But the one thing that I think is different about things now than before is you have a piece of evidence in that transcript that the contents are not in dispute. The words are what the White House says the words are. Now, you may dispute like what the meaning of the words are or the severity of the words. Like, the words are the words. Donald Trump asked the Ukrainian president to investigate Joe Biden. Like, that is just literally in the transcript. End of story. And I don't know if that means you would convince every swing voter that Trump should be impeached, but I think you can go to swing voters and say it is legitimate for us as Democrats to impeach and ask for a trial. You can't say we're doing this to score political points. We didn't do it before. We did it because we have this now that just is a direct threat to the sanctity of democracy, the sanctity of free elections. This is about foreign influence in our elections, and we can't sit idly by. You may not agree with the decision, but you at least understand what our motivation is here. I think they can pull that off in a way that they could not pull off with just the Mueller report, which was much more how they contested. And not that I question Mueller's credibility, but because it is by definition secondhand, it's not literally the White House saying it. It becomes more disputed.
Yeah, look, I mean, who knows if they can sell it to the average person, if the average person cares. But I care. Mm-hmm. So the case you've just described is why I think this is a real problem and why I think this is worth impeaching over. But look, a couple things. I think that a lot of presidents have done things that are worthy of impeachment. And, so for me, this is like, if you think it's a big deal that the president of the United States used the prestige of the White House and our taxpayer money to try to coerce a foreign leader to investigate one of arguably his most challenging domestic rival, then you should do this. And so I think that's a really substantive case to be made. But is it politically smart? I actually don't know the answer to that. My calculation on doing this has never been about, is this smart democratic politics, and it may or may not be.
I do think, and this is what I wrote in the piece for Real Clear Politics, the risk of impeachment is that it exacerbates polarization, and polarization, it can be politically good for you if you're on the bigger end of it. If you have the majority, polarization is just fine. But it's not so great for the wheels of government to work once you get in power, because the system is designed for cooperation, collaboration, not for straight polarizing majoritarian government. And because polarization didn't work out for Democrats in 2016, they should be wary about operating on the same fault lines today. But I think there is a potential to use this as an antidote to polarization, because you can say, and again, it's not going to give you literal consensus, 100% agreement, but I think you can go to people across the ideological spectrum and say, what does it mean to be an American? To be an American, what binds us as Americans? It is a deep belief in democracy and self-determination. That is what has sustained the Union since the founding. When it was tested in the Civil War, it was the Union that won. It was the Union that said we have to remain together, and we did remain together. And we're asking ourselves today, what keeps us together? It should be that. And this is and to have foreign meddling in democratic elections is a direct threat to that. And I don't care what your party is or your ideology is, we can all unite around that.
Yeah. Now, look, fundamentally, and Democrats are going to find ways to mess this up, and there'll be lone wolves who do stupid things, and Adam Schiff's going to say or do crazy things, and Maxine Waters and the Squad and all that, right? But fundamentally, the Democrats are on the right side of this issue. What Donald Trump did is intellectually indefensible if you are a serious, thoughtful, honest person. So Democrats have the moral high ground here. I think the question is, if Democrats, forget that, if Congress doesn't impeach, I don't see how any of this ever stops. There's no indication that Donald Trump is going to tone this down or tone this back. There is no disincentive for this behavior. The only constitutional mechanism that Congress has, now granted there's an election, that's perfectly great, but the only constitutional mechanism, I guess they could try to censure him or something, but I think this is clearly impeachable. They're going to try to do this, but the thing about impeachment is that it's dynamic. We don't know what's going to happen, and it could be that by starting the wheels of this process, there will be things that happen that we could not have anticipated, things that are revealed, and ultimately, right now it looks absurd to think that Republicans in the Senate could vote to remove him. It seems highly implausible, but who knows what happens once this starts kicking in.
Now, I actually wrote about the possibility of a President Pence for Politico just yesterday, and I do want to self-promote and talk about that. But before we get there, before we get to the point where he might actually be convicted, let's talk about how we would get from point A to point Z. I think it's pretty much a given that Democrats are going to impeach. Now, you have a number of people who have said, who are more moderate Democrats, who have said, I'm for an impeachment inquiry, but haven't necessarily said they're for impeachment. But I think they're pretty far out on the limb at this point. They're going to have their hearings. There will be articles of impeachment drawn up by the Judiciary Committee. I assume we'll clear Judiciary Committee. And I would imagine they can get the 218 for that, by the end of the year. It's a rough timeline. And I had thought before that Mitch McConnell would just not have a trial. If you look at the Constitution, the Senate has the power to try impeachments. There's no obligation that they hold a trial if the House does impeach.
This is like a Merrick Garland type situation.
Under the Constitution, McConnell could Merrick Garland this and just not do it. However, there are Senate rules in place that say once the House brings the impeachment to the Senate, that the Senate is immediately in trial. And there was a Politico article a few days ago that mentioned that but still left it a little vague whether McConnell would have felt bound by those set of rules. But McConnell himself said in an interview that he would be. And so now we know, McConnell will have the trial. Now, he also said in that interview that it doesn't say how long the trial has to be.
Yes, it could be a very quick trial.
Now,
speedy trial.
In the Clinton impeachment, I don't think they actually did it, but I know the Clinton, if you read Peter Baker's book, The Breach, which is a fantastic book. And
yeah, I wrote my senior thesis. My dissertation was on that book.
I'm super annoyed and jealous. Peter Baker is literally was 6 years ahead of me at Oberlin. And so not only was he 6 years ahead of me at Oberlin, like within less than a decade of him graduating from Oberlin, he churns out an absolutely, amazing book about the Clinton impeachment. And what the hell was I doing, at that point? I don't think he was even blogging it by that point.
None of us are going to look good compared to, Peter Baker, and he looks young too.
Yeah. So in the book, he mentioned the Clinton legal team had considered having a motion to dismiss the charges put on the Senate floor immediately once the trial began. And the best case scenario would be that they'd actually have wooed a handful of moderate Republicans to come over and actually dismiss the charges, which was not a ludicrous concept because there were more moderate Republicans in the Congress in those days. But even if they couldn't get that, they would get more than a third of the Senate to dismiss, and then you'd basically signal at the top, you're never going to convict this guy. You already got a third who say, more than a third, who don't even think the charges are valid. You can forget it. I don't think they actually had the vote, though. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about that. So McConnell or some other Republican could put a similar motion on the floor on day one, get a majority vote, and you're done. But I'm sure McConnell would have preferred to not even have to cast that vote because you're putting Susan Collins, Cory Gardner, Martha McSally, Tom Tillis. These are folks who are in, purple to light red states who are up for re-election. I would rather not have to take a vote on it one way or the other. And you could say McConnell could change the rules. He could do a nuclear option and change the rules, but that's a vote. Dismissing is a vote. They're going to have to take some kind of vote.
Could it be a voice vote?
No, someone would insist.
It has to be a real vote.
Someone would insist you call the roll.
Interesting. Well, good for Mitch McConnell for now. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if he stands firm for this.
Well, but even if he didn't, if he was, screw it, and someone would say, hey, parliamentarian, what do you have to say about that? And if you're going to overrule the parliamentarian, that's a vote.
Yeah.
So he can't avoid a vote. And so because there's going to be some kind of vote, it seems very hard that you would actually get a two-thirds vote to actually convict Trump. That would require minimum 20 Republicans. And that's assuming that Joe Manchin or Doug Jones would vote to convict, right, which I don't think you can assume.
I don't know if Trump. This is the thing that surprised one of the things that surprised me the most about Trump is that he doesn't care about his reputation in polite society and the mainstream media, because he could have gone down. He could have tried to have a legacy and go down as a narcissist. He could have tried to go down in history as this beloved guy who stood up to the NRA and did infrastructure first, and he clearly didn't go that direction. But look, he will very likely go down in history as one of only, would he be the third president impeached?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Because Nixon wasn't impeached. Just Andrew Johnson, Clinton, and presumably Trump.
So only three presidents in our history impeached. And you can see how it's sped up in recent years, whether that's indicative of our penchant to impeach or just our bad behavior in more modern times. I won't say, but I mean, this will be on his permanent record. Donald Trump is going to have been only the third president to have been impeached. That is not nothing. That's something.
Well, I mean, not only does Trump have, a total lack of shame, a lot of concern about how history would treat him, He also has no interest in legislating. I mean, I think other presidents would worry, oh, man, if I get impeached, then I can't get this bill of mine passed. I really need that bill passed for my legacy. Trump has no legislative legacy that he cares about.
He does things via executive order, and he does things via administrative rollback, and then he fights the culture war via Twitter and rhetoric. So it's not, I mean, even
the executive order mechanism has not been a flawless path for him. Many of those things have been blocked or stalled by judges. They do a slapdash job on these executive orders and regulatory decisions, and so a lot of those things aren't going to stick because he doesn't actually care.
What do you think is happening in these bureaucracies that we don't know about? Because the media is so fixated on Trump and Trump's tweets. What is happening right now at the EPA or the Energy Department or wherever that we don't, that no one's even paying attention to?
Well, I mean, I don't know what I don't know. I mean, there are things that are. I mean, we know the EPA is in a blood feud with California over their clean air regulations, trying to deny California the right to set their own standards. So it's not like there's no activity there. I'm sure there is. Now, of course, they're also trying to ban vaping, which is not exactly the most conservative position. So there's always
it could all be rolled back too, right? I mean, if you do it by executive order, we're going to get to this in a second. President Elizabeth Warren would presumably roll it all back on day one.
Well, anything by executive order. I mean, things that are actually clear the regulatory process and go through those bureaucratic hurdles don't get undone like that. You actually have to go through the process yourself. But yeah, those things are susceptible to being rolled back. So I just don't think Trump really is worried about how this impacts policy. What he likes being in the fight. He likes being up against the wall. He likes me against the world. And he goes to his rallies and says it's you and me against the world. That's that's the comfort space. That's his comfort zone. And therefore, I don't think we can debate whether he wants impeachment or not. I don't know if he actively wants it, but he's not uncomfortable.
Yeah.
In that environment.
The one check on him that I totally underestimated or overestimated, I guess, is the desire that he would have to be beloved, like by the general public, and to be seen as popular. And I thought that would make him more liberal. That was actually one of my fears as a conservative, that it would make him more liberal. But I also thought it would serve to check some of his other bad impulses.
But all evidence over the past, nearly 3 years is that his narcissism and need for approval is not tied to breadth. He does not need universal love.
Right.
He does not need high approval numbers. He needs the love from somebody, some mass of people who go to his rallies. And that is combined with, again, we're being armchair psychologists here, a real need for conflict. I mean, this is not a guy who avoids, he might avoid personal confrontation amongst his staff, and there's evidence of that, but he needs to be in the arena,
totally.
In the media landscape, and he can't last a day of tranquility. He creates conflict where there doesn't need to be conflict.
It's funny you say tranquility, because I was just teaching my son has to learn the preamble to the Constitution, mm-hmm. and I wrote a guitar song to teach him, to help him memorize it, and tranquility is one of the words that the founders use, which is not an everyday term, mm-hmm. but it's something that they wanted us to have. Yeah. Domestic tranquility. And we don't have it with Donald Trump.
Right.
He doesn't want tranquility. You're absolutely right. And you want to talk about, any sane person, if they survived the Russia scandal, would have taken a deep breath and said, man, okay.
Dodge that bullet.
We dodged the bullet. Robert Mueller, we got so lucky with this guy that he has lost a step. He let me off the hook. I'm gonna like be on my best behavior for let's lay low for a couple weeks, and then we'll revisit, the Legion of Doom stuff. Instead, literally, Trump picks up the phone the next day and does this impeachable offense.
And I think the opportunity for Democrats here, and again, they should be pursuing the impeachment in a sober way and not a point-scoring way. But there is an election around the corner. And I think the narrative you want to set up about Trump is, because the Trump argument is going to be, I gave this great economy and they want to distract you from it. The only way they can tear me down is impeachment because I've done such an amazing job for you. And I think the call is an example of what does this guy do every day? How's he spending his time? He doesn't spend his time looking out for you. He takes precious time out of his day in conversations with foreign leaders, and not just one, mind you. We also know about Australia, and who knows who else, trying to help himself. His entire presidency is a self-enrichment project, from getting foreign dignitaries to stay in his hotels to getting foreign political leaders to do his bidding. If the economy is good, it's not through his actions, because you can see how he spends his day to day, and it's about himself and himself only.
Yeah. Biden should just copy and paste that into his stump speech. That would be helpful. I feel weird. We don't have to go into this, Bill, because it's been self-reflection for as many times. It's so weird to me how so many conservatives who, as you pointed out, conservatives should ostensibly be the first in line to care about what the founders wanted and about, the rule of law and all these things that we talk about, being a constitutional conservative, and the fact that so many of them are just drinking the Kool-Aid is so, again, you could say, well, this has been going on for years, but there are some of them, Bill, that actually stood up to him in the past, who have now succumbed to the cult.
Well, even some of them who, they may take a vote here or there, or try to nudge him in a different direction, behind closed doors. Lindsey Graham being maybe kind of the consummate example of that. But they've made the decision, this guy's beloved by my base at home, and I can't be seen not defending him when the stakes are high.
Yeah, but it's so hypocritical when you see the exact thing that Lindsey Graham said about Bill Clinton. Mm-hmm. I haven't changed. I remember that. I thought Bill Clinton should be impeached. Mm-hmm. And if he hadn't have been, I would have been up in arms. And I think people who look at the political cost Republicans paid for impeachment have not looked into the cost they would have paid for not doing impeachment.
Now, if I can shift here to my article about Pence, so I wrote a piece, if we get President Pence, how does it impact the Democratic race? And I think it would completely upend it. But before, I didn't get into how would we get President Pence in detail, but you would get there if Republicans came to the realization, hey, I'll get President Pence. I'm not abandoning my conservatism to get President Pence. I'm going to augment it because President Pence would be more conservative than Trump is. And that only is going to happen if Republican voters themselves come to that realization. The voters came to that realization, and the senators might follow along. Yeah. And you would still get your tax cuts, you'd still get your judges, but you won't get the creepy love of Putin and Kim Jong-un, and you won't get the trade wars. Now, one thing you actually might not get, Pence was a bit of an immigration compromiser. He was, in the Bush years, talking about how do we get a guest worker program. He wasn't talking pathway to citizenship, but he was talking about if they step across the border for 10 seconds and then apply and come back as a guest worker, they can still be here, which is not really the Trump way.
I don't think you would see Pence or any other Republican anytime soon starting to push for immigration reform based on everything that has transpired. I think what you would see is maybe some more humane sort of enforcement.
Yeah, I don't want to assume Pence would not put kids in cages, but it's possible Pence would put kids in cages.
Enforcement and certainly more compassionate rhetoric, which is, at this point, we'll take what we can get.
So that all could be yours, Matt. All that conservatism could be yours.
Wouldn't this have been more appealing even a year ago? I mean, right now we are looking at an election where it may not matter. But if we could have said, like, look, you're going to get Pence for at least 2 years, wouldn't that have been a more appealing trade at that point?
Well, at this point, it's not like Trump is some sort of shoo-in for re-election. I mean, the notion that, I mean, it's possible he could win again, of course, but sure. It's not like Democrats looking at the poll numbers saying, wow, I'm in trouble here. Most Democrats beat Trump in polls. Now, you can debate whether Pence is stronger or weaker, but just on the straight data, his net unfavorable is slightly underwater, but better than Trump's. He would at least have the opportunity. You know, people on the left would say, hey, Pence is just as corrupt as he is. He's knee deep in the Ukraine too. He spoke to the Ukraine leaders. It's possible he may not be able to escape, but you go back in history with, Harding and Coolidge. Now, Harding and Teapot Dome didn't break out big until after he died, but it did break out after that. And Coolidge handled it by establishing a bipartisan special prosecutor team to investigate the Harding cronies, and they convicted his Interior Secretary, and he forced out Harding's AG as well to boot. And so he got the reputation of being a guy who cleaned house. Pence could do something similar, whatever he did.
Yeah,
he fire a handful of the right people. People would say, "Hey, we've moved past that. Good for you, Pence." Yeah. And people in the middle would say, "Oh God, we're over. I'm just so tired of being on the edge of my seat all the time." I don't agree with Pence on gays. I don't think he doesn't need to be in a room with a woman without freaking out. But at least things are calm.
Right, I love that. Now, here's what this is probably beyond the scope of your column, but what I wonder about is. See, I wish we could keep the good parts of Trump and get rid of the bad. One of the reasons that conservatives went for Trump is because they knew that if Mike Pence were president, the media and the left would have destroyed him and cast him as a homophobe and an evil, like, whatever. Like, and Trump doesn't allow that to happen. If Pence becomes president, do we revert to a world where instead of being thankful to finally have at least a sane, decent person now as president, where because he's not tweeting crazy things, because he's not calling the media enemies of the people, because he's not involved in these other scandals, that the media decides, oh, well, let's take him down for being a homophobe or a misogynist or whatever they decide he is.
Well, that's why I think if we had President Pence, the Democratic primary gets completely scrambled because Democrats will very much want to go after Pence on culture war grounds. Do you turn to Biden for that? Biden's main reason for being in this race is that Trump's a severe aberration of what America's supposed to be about. I'm the return to normalcy. Well, if Pence successfully becomes the normalcy, I have turned the page and cleaned house, Biden's justification disappears. Similarly, or somewhat conversely, Warren and Sanders are arguments for renewed combat. Warren is, we had a fight for big structural change, and Bernie is revolution. And if the folks in the middle are like, I don't want revolution now, I want to chill. We had a lot of battles before, and I kind of want to break. Yeah. And again, Warren and Sanders, they are perfectly liberal on social issues, but it's not their wheelhouse. They want to talk about the economic stuff.
So Mayor Pete and Kamala. Pete wins Iowa.
Mayor Pete would love President Pence. This guy was digging in on Pence from the beginning. They're both Hoosiers. Pete has religious left themes. He was going after Pence for being a moral hypocrite who didn't understand scripture. He would love to go after Pence every single day.
But here's the problem. The timeline. I think it's impossible. Look, okay, first of all, you and I both concede at this point this is incredibly hypothetical, right?
Yeah.
Like, the odds are very, very, very slim that Trump will be removed.
Correct.
But let's assume that even if that were to happen, I mean, when do you think that would play out? I mean, impeachment in the House could happen sooner.
Yeah, I think impeachment happens by the end of the year. I don't see why they drag it out.
But they're going to start voting in New Hampshire and Iowa
February.
in January.
I mean, it is totally possible that we have the House impeachment and the trial completed before anyone casts a vote on the primary.
No. You think?
I mean, my assumption, and this is not based on inside information or anything, I just don't see why they need 8 months to do the research here on the hearings.
Okay.
They're going to want to cross a certain amount of T's and make sure they have sort of the full story of the Ukraine situation.
But if it got serious to the point where Trump was potentially going to be removed, doesn't that prolong?
Well, if you had an actual, I mean, mind you, if you have President Pence, it's because Republican voters shifted. That we've actually already broken through our polarization and created a situation where a strong majority of the country wanted Trump out.
So this isn't politicians all of a sudden finding their conscience and standing up for the right thing. This is politicians responding to their voters.
I don't think 20 Republican senators are going to vote their conscience with their bases on the opposite side of the fence. I don't think it's going to happen.
You'll be lucky if you get 2.
If Republican voters themselves have a bona fide shift, then you might see something dramatic.
Hard to imagine that happening.
Now, and if I agree, I'm not expecting it. But in that circumstance, if stuff happened in the hearings or some other kind of shoe dropped, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's so many shoes that were dropped. I don't know what it'd have to be. But if something happened, then maybe you'd have a longer trial. Maybe you'd see.
I mean, Bill, there was a survey that I saw the other day. I forget what it was. I think it was legit. That was like the majority of Republicans were like, they were asked, like, is it okay for a president to pressure a foreign government to help, you know? And the Republican voters were like, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, so that's,
you know what I'm saying?
That's a good argument for we're not convicting Donald Trump in the Senate. But if for some reason you had the shift, then McConnell might say, okay, let's have a 3-month trial. Let's really hash out these arguments and make sure the Republican voters are really with us on this, and it's going to be okay for people to convict, and then you might be into the spring or whatever. More likely, we're done by February.
We need a good Johnny Cochran. If the glove don't fit, you must acquit. If something, you must convict. We got to have a good Trump. There has to be something. Hit us up, in the comments section.
No,
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to shift to you have something in the works. I know you told me before you're working on a piece about the rise of war and what you think that means for the Democrats.
It seems like she's gaining steam in the polls just at the time when this whole Trump scandal is because he wants to get rid of Joe Biden, right?
Right.
And it's interesting to me that the Democrats seem to be going along with that. Like, the thing Trump wants to get rid of Joe Biden, the Democrats simultaneously seem to be going, hey, let's go with Elizabeth Warren. And that strikes me as weird, that they would want to basically that they agree on this. The progressives and Trump agree that Elizabeth Biden should be the nominee. Now, look, be careful what you wish for sometimes. Democrats wanted Donald Trump to win. A lot of them did. They wanted him to be the nominee. That didn't turn out so well for any of us, and especially Democrats. I still believe that Biden, conventional wisdom, is a much better matchup against Trump, and that Elizabeth Warren, I don't think, look, can she win? Is it possible? Yes. Once you're the nominee, you're locked in. It's sort of a binary choice. Things can happen. If you're playing the odds, though, I just don't know if you could create a worst possible matchup for Dems. And right now, when the stakes are so high, when, like, you know, not only do you always want to win elections, but you could argue like the Republic hangs in the balance. Is Elizabeth Warren, are Democrats really going to do this? Are they really going to bet the future on Elizabeth Warren?
Well, I don't think that is a certainty as of yet. I would not take, I mean, she's had a bona fide rise, no doubt. I mean, she's not the front runner, but you can certainly say her and Biden are the two front runners at this point. Well, you couldn't say that before. So the fact that she's risen into the mid-20s doesn't mean that she will definitely keep going into the 40s and 50s. She could, you know, but I don't think you can assume that yet.
Okay, but it does seem like Biden is fading, and Bernie just had a heart attack or something.
It wasn't a heart attack; he had a blockage. Let's not overstate.
He's got stents.
He had an arterial blockage and now has stents. We have not heard him say he had a heart attack.
He's 100 years old.
Yeah,
he's had stents. I'm just saying.
Dick Cheney had stents and he hung around for 8 years. No one said you got to get
invincible. Dick Cheney will outlive everyone. But it does seem that Elizabeth Warren, because my point of interrupting you is not, my only point is to say it's not just that Elizabeth Warren is gaining steam, it's that other people around her seem to be crumbling.
Well, I want to dial that back a little bit. You look at the Real Clear Politics average over the past couple weeks. There's a real shoot up for Warren.
Yeah.
But Bernie is still relatively flat. And Biden's dip is Warren's rise and Biden's dip are not equal. You know, Biden's still kind of in the range of where he has been, just on the lower end of it. So it's a bit of a fade, but it's not a collapse. He's still in the mid-20s. Whereas, you know, for much of the race has been more, you know, low 30s. And so I would argue that in the late August, early September period, pre-Ukraine transcript, Warren was getting a nice run of articles about her crowds, and Biden was getting a series of headlines about saying one dumb thing or another. He never had a good headline for a stretch. And Warren was getting all this coverage for her crowds that Bernie was not getting. And so she was becoming seen as the premier progressive choice, and Biden wasn't growing. And questions about his durability were coming into the fore. People were kind of just starting to maybe poke at Warren a little bit. Buttigieg took a swipe at Warren a couple weeks ago. Because, you know, actually before Buttigieg, Stephen Colbert was pushing Warren on, why can't you just say you're going to raise taxes to pay for Medicare for all? Why can't you just say that? And she dodged it with him. And then Buttigieg said she was being very evasive. That was just starting to kind of get into the mix. And then she had big poll numbers, and then and then you had the impeachment stuff. And so that didn't go into the stratosphere. But we still haven't had the phase of the Warren pushback, which is inevitable. I mean, everybody gets their pushback. And I can just anecdotally on Twitter, and obviously Twitter is not real life. I'm not saying that this represents a large number of people, but I see a lot more, we haven't asked Warren about this. Warren can't win the general election. You know, this is going to be a huge problem. Like, that sentiment exists in somewhere in the Democratic community, and it's going to percolate at some point. And so I don't think we know yet whether, you know, Warren is definitely making some strides in convincing folks, hey, maybe she is electable. She is pretty good on the stump. She is personable. She's got a tight pitch. She gets into a fight with Mark Zuckerberg. That's good for Warren, all that kind of thing. But there's still untested elements to her that I think will get tested, and we'll see if the rise is unstoppable. And because of the impeachment stuff that Biden is intertwined with, it's a test for Biden. Let's see how you handle this. I agree this is all phony on Trump's part, but we know if the optics are bad and you have a difficulty explaining away these optics, then I'm not going to be so sure about you. Now, of course, as I pointed out in a past article, there's everything about Warren's Native American ancestry falls in that same category. It may be unfair, but show me you're going to deal with it. But right now, Biden's the one in the hot seat there. He's been kind of measured about it, which is making people a little anxious. But then last night, he had a kind of rip-roaring speech, which I thought was weird timing. Why are you doing this in the middle of the night in Nevada and not in the middle of the day in Iowa? But, he did do it. Got some headlines, got some morning headlines out of it. And we'll see if he kind of keeps up that tone over the next several days. And if that makes people say, you know what, I'm still not sold about Warren's electability, and you're showing me some fire here, Biden. I like that. We'll see.
Slouching to the White House, ambling to the nomination.
But so I certainly would not, I think your points there, one, Warren can overcome questions about her electability through evidence, through showing what she can do on the stump. But I wouldn't assume that Democrats en masse have already blessed her in that respect. I think there's still a lot of, I don't know about all these plans. I don't know about Pocahontas, liberal from Massachusetts, academic professor. I'm not sure. That's still in the mix. And now what's also complicated here is Iowa and New Hampshire are almost uniformly white, very liberal, highly college-educated Democratic electorate. So that's right in Warren's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Now, some of the most recent polling says she's doing a bit better with African Americans, doing a bit better with non-college. So it's not, you can't say she's strictly a niche candidate. And so long as nobody lays a glove on her, perhaps she'll do better and better. Her numbers among South Carolina African Americans are bad. That's still actively bad, single digits bad. And she did I wrote about her crowds for Politico a couple weeks ago, saying, her crowds are in many ways a big part of why she's doing well. The caveat is her strongest crowds are big blue cities that are not early primary states, but she also has good crowds in Iowa and New Hampshire, and Nevada to some extent. She does not have good crowds in South Carolina. And not so much the number. She had a crowd in Aiken, South Carolina, which was 925, which was good for Aiken, South Carolina, but it was a mostly white crowd. And South Carolina is not a mostly white state for Democrats. So it says that the people that she needs to reach aren't showing up so this past Saturday, she goes to an historically black college in South Carolina, and her crowd is still majority white. So she still has a long way to go there. And so this is something that's sort of an unknown dynamic. In the past, if you won Iowa and New Hampshire, you're going to run the table.
Yeah.
If you can knock off the first two, Democrats get on board. But we haven't had an Iowa, New Hampshire twofer in the era where Nevada and South Carolina have standalone contests in February. And now Nevada's electorate is more liberal than South Carolina's. It's sort of similarly liberal to Iowa and New Hampshire, but not as white. It's also a caucus, so that's an added wrinkle. South Carolina is a primary, majority black, almost half moderate conservative. So if you are a candidate that has predominantly white college-educated support that carries you through Iowa and New Hampshire, and maybe Nevada, does South Carolina say, I don't care. That's not my kind of candidate. I don't have to do what you say. Or do they get along? Or they just say, she's looking good, just give her to her. That's never been tested yet. And Biden is certainly trying to build the firewall in South Carolina. And so if he can win there, you go right into Super Tuesday, which is a whole different mess of states, and maybe he can have the comeback if he loses the first two.
So the last question I have for you then is the Scherometer, the Billometer. What are the odds today that Joe Biden or Elizabeth Warren is your nominee? Where do you put him today?
I think the odds are pretty high that's one of the two. Now, they both could fade.
Right.
Biden could, if Biden continues to have difficulty on the stump, I think he would lose. And I think if Warren gets hit really hard and there's some people saying, I'm not so sure about it, that she could fade, then if they were both out of the picture, that opens up for a lot of other people. So I don't want to say it has to be the two of them. But I do think they are two people with genuine bases of support. I think there are genuine moderates in the Democratic Party, and there are genuine populist progressives in the Democratic Party, and you could very easily see it being a binary choice between the two of them. And I've seen two polls that pit a two-person race, and Biden wins both of them. Now, that could easily change.
Do you give him the edge?
What's
right
that?
Today? Do you give Biden the edge still?
If Biden can give a B performance on the stump, if he can be pretty good on the stump, I would give him the edge. If he's doing a C- to D-, then no. So I kind of feel like, Biden, I think Biden controls a lot of his destiny here.
Yeah. I think he can give a C+ to B performance.
C+, but C+, C+ is good enough.
So, well, this may be as good as it gets, as Jack Nicholson said. So,
we should leave it there. Anything else you got to plug today?
No. I don't like to. Though I don't like to talk about myself. I don't like to do any shameless plugs. So I'm good.
And I've already plugged my two things. So why don't we leave it there? And I will see you next week in the DMZ.
You got it. See you guys. Thanks, Bill.